Welcome everyone to today's webcast. Happy to have you here. So Allison, do you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. Hello, everybody. My name is Allison Ritz. I am an account executive with VisibleThread, here with Kyle Pearson, who is our VP of Customer Success. We are going to be walking through some topics with you today. So just to give you kind of a quick overview of VisibleThread, I know we have different levels of familiarity on the call. So really there are two elements of the VT Docs and the VisibleThread platform. So VT Docs is for proposal managers, contract managers, capture managers, and solutions architects. So shortcuts activities like shredding docs, requirement gap analysis, are we identifying requirements and, answering the mail on those, flags risky FAR clauses and handles contract language and amendments. So, it's for win theme, resume analysis, and end-to-end kind of pieces of the proposal management process. So collectively, there are over 20 major process steps that can help automate throughout the proposal lifecycle from capture to delivery. When we talk about VT Writer, that is really for those that are creating content. So users range from editorial managers creating proposal contents to even to, marketing teams responding to RFIs and sources sought. So VT Writer ensures your teams write with a single tone of voice and has an impact internally and externally for every organization. So the platform is currently working to optimize the processes of hundreds of customers that we're looking to solve many of the problems that you have and many of the problems that we're talking about today. So across multiple industries, we work with some of the largest government contractors in the world, as well as partnering with small to medium-sized businesses to support them in not only winning contracts, but successfully and efficiently delivering results to their customers. So just a little bit of an agenda for today. We're not going to kill you with slides. We want this to be a situation where we walk through these 5 kind of common mistakes, jump into the platform and actually show you how VisibleThread can help and how VisibleThread can, optimize your process and provide data in these sort of situations. And then take some time in between to answer some questions and then obviously Q&A at the end. So we want to make sure that you see the how in today's presentation. So just kind of a last piece here before we jump in. So when you signed up for the webinar, we asked you to cover our 5 topics today and rank them in order of importance to your team. So what we saw, just a quick look at the results, is that ultimately we have a lot of people that are concerned with pursuing the wrong bids and alignment with the, pursuits that they're undertaking. Again, making sure that we achieve compliance, talking about a single tone of voice and analyzing past performance and, being competitively priced. So just a little look at how everybody feels about that going in. And we're going to walk through all of these and show you how VisibleThread can help. So I'm going to hand things over here to Kyle and we're going to jump into our first mistake.
Great, thanks, Allison. And I'd argue they're all important, but it's nice to kind of see where people's heads are at. And so we'll start here with pursuing the wrong bids. A topic that is obviously important to the group and also one that is always top of mind when we're talking with users, with potential customers, all that good stuff. So let's talk about the challenges and kind of how that comes about. So I hear a lot kind of on the street, well, we bid on everything. And ultimately, it's challenging to review the wide universe of opportunities that are out there against your technical capabilities. How mature are those capabilities? Do you have the resources to deliver against these opportunities on time and on budget? And ultimately, if you're pursuing poor fit opportunities, one, that can lead to cost overruns in performance as you're kind of maybe we realize, oh, this capability isn't as mature as maybe it should be. We're under-resourced. There's reputational hit there as well, and ultimately puts you at a competitive disadvantage for winning more business in the future. And ultimately, I think it's businesses don't do a good enough job of looking at all these opportunities, analyzing them against data, customer language, et cetera, and reviewing it against your own capabilities. And when you pursue these opportunities that are poor fit, you exhaust your bid and proposal resources. Those are scarce. Ultimately, if you're pursuing opportunities that you may lose, you don't want to cause unnecessary burnout on already overburdened teams. Staff retention is top of mind lately. Are we best deploying our limited resources against the opportunities that you're best placed to win? And ultimately, you'll hear me talk about opportunity cost a lot today. Every dollar, every man hour spent pursuing poor fit opportunities is one that you cannot deploy against better opportunities. And I think that's really the crux to the matter here. And so I know Allison's deeply passionate about this topic. So Allison, why don't you walk us through what can we do to avoid some of these pitfalls and arm people to make these decisions with a bit more data and objectivity?
Absolutely. So what we want to do is give you the ability to make sure you're asking the right questions and continue throughout the process to revisit your decisions as conditions change. So we identified the front end, what our differentiators are, what the ROI was, and what the benefit was to the business. As we go through the process, are those things staying true? Are we able to continue to check throughout the process and make sure that this is still a viable pursuit and that something hasn't changed that's going to be material? So we want to make sure that we have the resources to deliver. So throughout the process, through our system of checks and balances, are we able to continue to deliver profitably on this opportunity? And cease kind of reflexive bidding. I know a lot of times bidding is based on, it can become a very reactionary process, particularly as you get further downstream, and you can rely heavily on existing relationships. So what we want to do is help you to insert more data into that process so you know from a bottom line perspective that these are the opportunities that are best aligned with your core competencies, best aligned with your past performance and past success, and are the things that your organization should be pursuing in order to move yourself forward.
Great. So on that note, I'll actually dive into the platform here. Let's talk about where VisibleThread, I think, can play a role here. So I will share my screen. Excellent. So we're within VT Docs, and what I've done here is I have uploaded about 8 statements of work, SOWs, PWSs, into a folder. And so we're analyzing them as a group. You see them lined up here side by side, and we're analyzing them against technical capabilities. And this is a list that you're in control of. You can tailor this to your context. But for this example, we've listed these technical capabilities that you can deliver. You've delivered against it in the past. You're able to do it right away. And what we can do is we can see density, alignment, misalignment of, for example, training and architecture. Where do we see that word appear across the range of documents here, and where don't we? So architecture occurs 8 times in this document, 0 times in this document, so on and so forth. So just doing some quick visual analysis here, we can see that documents 2, 5, and 7, we don't have a real high density of hits against our suite of capabilities. Maybe we don't pursue these opportunities. We focus on documents 3, 4, and 6 here. There's a higher density there. And if you choose to bid everything, which I don't recommend, this is a way that you can prioritize and allocate resources. I can devote more bid and proposal dollars to these higher density hits. And so what we're doing here is we're teeing up your reviewers. We're teeing up these bid, no bid decisions based on documentation, customer language, bumped up against your own technical capabilities. And we can get into more detail here. This is just a good primer. We can export this report. You can bring this to gate reviews. We can get further into the detail here, but we want to empower teams to say, we're going after these opportunities because we're not going after this because of X, Y, and Z. We want to empower people, and we're teeing up this review. We're prioritizing which opportunities you're going to go after. Well, one quick story. I have users that I work with. They have it's a stoplight list of terms. Some capabilities are green. We deliver those all the time as a matter of course. Red, maybe they're in development. They're in the R&D stages. We've never delivered them. and they can group those opportunities against those color-coded categories. There's a lot we can do here. And so we're going to return to this function, but that's where I'd kind of start here in terms of prioritizing your time and those precious B&P resources. So moving to the next challenge, mistake, insufficient past performance analysis. What do I mean by insufficient? So if we go into the challenge here, looking for past performance evidence and content, it's a two-pronged issue. One, you could have dozens, you could have hundreds of past contracts that you've performed under. What's the best contract that we can reference vis-a-vis the current RFP that we're going after? But then within that contract, we still have to pull out relevant sections of the statement of work to show that evidence. What was the requirement that we delivered against? Maybe we need to highlight which labor categories we performed under. And so it's really manual and tedious. A lot of teams spend too much time searching through contracts that aren't terribly compelling, they aren't terribly relevant, and you can miss some of those diamonds in the rough. There's human error there. And it's just kind of a soul-destroying process as well. Last thing to think about, not only is it just finding the right examples, it's difficult to line up the RFP that you're looking at against past content. We want to find alignment between the two, and that can once again prioritize which documents we look at. So how can we do that? Well, automating this analysis can speed up your ability to identify the most relevant contracts. We don't want you to spend your time searching through duds. And then within that contract, we can drill more quickly down into SOW references, LCAT tables, and things like that. And then finally, we have a way where you can review the RFP against your own past proposals, your past performance evidence, and that of your partners and affiliates where applicable. And I think that's really powerful, as opposed to having, two documents up on two screens and having to go back and forth, or relying on historical knowledge, which might not be equally distributed throughout the business. Let's finally also use customer themes and language to guide this analysis, as opposed to me, once again, kind of control finding my way through based on what I may or may not know. It might be outdated. So let me, once again, return to VisibleThread. So in this folder, I have past contracts, I have PWSs, I have SOWs. Similar idea. I'm looking at a range of documents. They're lined up against one another. And excuse me, I should be in the Discovery tab. Here are the documents that I'm looking for. Which document is most relevant based on the requirements I need to deliver, and then once again, which portion. So VisibleThread will identify these key themes and keywords within these documents automatically using natural language processing. We're still seeing that spread of occurrence or lack thereof, but in this case, I know exactly what I'm searching for. I'm looking for evidence of me performing cybersecurity kind of risk management in the past. VisibleThread will show you every iteration of cybersecurity, and you can select the most relevant example for your context. So we see cybersecurity and privacy risk management, cybersecurity risk management. I've selected those two themes. We're seeing where those themes appear and where don't they. So we're removing certain documents from your to-do list or from your hopper. But we can layer this search. Let's look for another idea, database management. I'll search for database. Once again, I can grab database management where it appears in these documents. VisibleThread is tracking where and how it's being used. And now let's narrow the lens. Let's just go to those selected themes. And here we see all these documents without numerals here. I don't need to spend any time reviewing them. I'll focus my time on this PWS and this PWS. And ultimately, this one appears to be the winner. We can get further down into the detail. We can actually export these documents and highlight in the text where the themes are appearing. But this is a great way to get you started, put you on your best foot forward to say, okay, I'm searching through these documents. I don't have to control find my way through confirming that, yep, these aren't good. Let's focus our time here and then get into the most relevant portion of the section, the statement of work, that I can quote to win this current effort. In discovery, there's a lot of power here to empower users to do just that. So, moving on to the third mistake, incorrectly pricing a proposal. So that might seem fairly simple at face value. Ultimately, price is just a function of scope and risk. And so I think the challenge teams face when they're pricing efforts is ultimately it starts at the very beginning. Particularly for complex efforts, we might have hundreds, thousands of requirements hiding throughout one document or a range of documents. It's difficult, it's manual, it's tedious to identify those requirements. So we're in danger of missing them. Or because of the time it takes to get those requirements into an actionable, reviewable format, it doesn't give us enough time to truly read, absorb, and understand the requirements. And so, that delays estimating kickoff. More importantly, those missed requirements, those misunderstood requirements can lead to underestimated costs. That also then leads to insufficient risk registers. Have you identified all your risks? Not if you don't understand every single requirement. And then we might see suboptimal management and contingency reserves applied against those risks or risks we've failed to identify. So ultimately, in this case, let's go with underestimated costs, we've missed risk, leads to an artificially low price, which might allow you to win the effort, but it would be a Pyrrhic victory, because once you get into performance, you need to erode margin as those hidden requirements come to the fore to deliver. And then at best, maybe the customer would work with you, but you're going to have to kind of utilize some relationship capital to adjust requirements, adjust cost and funding, things like that. Then on the flip side, businesses can be overly conservative. They can overly cushion their price or their reserves because of that unknown. Leads to a higher price, you're in danger of losing. So that's all, terribly concerning. How can we get ahead of that and mitigate some of this? Well, we want to quickly identify every single requirement in one or a range of documents. That's step one. But we want to get those requirements kind of sorted into a reviewable, actionable format by our estimators, by functional teams. That allows them to read through the requirements that pertain to them. They can get that output faster. They have more time to read and understand the requirement. So we're seeing better risk registers with a more balanced kind of Goldilocks, just right levels of management and contingency reserves, and better basis of estimates. I think that kind of gets left out of these pricing discussions. Can you communicate and articulate how you've arrived at a certain price or cost buildup? That's really important, particularly for high dollar proposals that will be audited. So where does VisibleThread come in? Let's bring it back up. So in this case, I'm looking at one statement of work here. I've selected it, and I'm applying a dictionary, simply a collection of key terms. And what I've done is I'm using these key terms, and I'm grouping them under functional reviewers or owners. My test engineers care about these keywords. My systems engineers care about these keywords. So the point is, we're going to use these categories, these buckets, to group requirements in the statement of work and get it into an actionable, reviewable format. So let's do just that. So we're taking that statement of work, and as opposed to sending this statement of work just out to all my subject matter experts, all my stakeholders, hey guys, how much is this going to cost? We can provide to people an Excel output, and this is the entire statement of work, verbatim. But you can see those dictionary keywords are highlighted for you within the text wherever they appear. We see it within the full text. Let me just kind of drill down simply to our dictionary hits for now. And so we're also, though, aligning the keyword hit against functional ownership. What does program management need to take a look at? What do my software engineers need to review, respond, think about? How much time and effort, time and material will it take to deliver against each requirement in the document? And so these functional reviewers can filter down. They don't need to be responsible for the entire statement of work. We're portioning out what we need them to review. And it took me all of 15 seconds to generate it, so we're giving our teams more time. Particularly compelling for teams that have day jobs outside of proposal support, as important as it is. They can better understand the requirement, we can better understand risk, scope, and we can price accordingly. Great. Moving in to
our quick question.
Oh, sure, go for it.
Yeah, we have a quick question. So going through this process and identifying requirements, what would you say would be a next step for a team? So we've identified here, what would be the next step to make this actionable?
So what I just showed in terms of assigning kind of functional review responsibility would be a next step. We can start thinking about, well, what needs to happen? So I might pivot here and talk about a compliance example because I think it's good and most people get it. If we have security type requirements, sure, we want to flag top secret, for example. Mm-hmm. We can actually use those dictionaries to drop in action-oriented language, guidance, policy statements to say, okay, what happens if we come across top secret? We can drop in what a reviewer needs to do. Engage your security team. Ensure that resumes have top secret clearance evidence on them for the sake of argument. There's a lot there we can do, and some of it depends on your internal processes. Are we thinking about pricing it? Are we thinking about putting together risk registers? Are we thinking about subcontract flowdowns? We can drop in, we can utilize structure and dictionaries to tee up those next steps. And I'm hoping it's a great question. It's a big question, but I'm hoping that kind of gets the juices flowing in terms of how we can attack it.
That's helpful. All right.
Cool. Good question. So moving into the fourth mistake, and I was a proud liberal arts major, so I love this topic. Are we being inconsistent in our tone and also working customer language into our responses? And our participants here, 61% of you said you sometimes review proposals for readability and quality standards. I'd love that sometimes to be always, but the time constraints there is key. You're overburdened. We're getting things late in the process. Ultimately, we want to be able to more quickly review our proposal content, in this case, for consistent tone and to reiterate customer language before it goes out the door. And how can we review that beyond red lines and comment bubbles? But before we do that, let's talk a little bit more about the challenge at hand. Pretty much everyone I talk to, whether you're an editor, you're a book boss, you're a proposal manager, you're juggling inputs, written input from a variety of authors, from a variety of functions. They speak in different tones. They might be highly technical. They might not be. And it's difficult to marry all that input into one coherent output. And it can result in choppy proposals. They're difficult to read. We don't want to tax evaluators more than they already are. So there's kind of a style variable here. It's difficult, and it's difficult for editors to herd those cats and and we're going through the editing cycle multiple times. So this challenge is compounded. So the other element there to think about is not only thinking about readability and quality, we're thinking about, are we reiterating customer terminology? It's difficult to line up, once again, RFPs against your own proposals to ensure that you're not missing key ideas. Because if you don't reiterate some of that key language, you might be speaking past your customer. Are you showing through your proposal that you know your customer? You understand the solution that they need to solve their problem. And that inconsistency, once again, burdens evaluators. We can't have that, particularly in competitive contexts. I'll actually share one quick story, and then Allison can walk you through the solution. I was talking with a user the other day where they were doing some facilities management type services. They were putting a proposal together, and there was a whole section on heating elements, like within buildings, and the customer was using the word boiler 25 times in a 40-page document. But their own proposal didn't use the word boiler, and the writers were saying, well, if we're talking about heating, of course we mean boiler. That's a dangerous assumption. Can we more quickly highlight that gap before the proposal goes out the door? So on that note, Allison, do you want to take the group through how we can address this really important topic, I think?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have to remember that evaluators are people. So there is a psychological element that can be taken advantage of by mimicking customer language and speaking directly to their identified benefits and their tone of voice. So we want to begin readability analysis early and often and continue that with subsequent proposal volumes. So throughout the proposal lifecycle, we want to make sure that our message and value propositions remain consistent and we're delivering a consistent message. Beyond that, we want to kind of close the bridge of the how. So we do a really great job of saying, what we can do and what we're bringing to the table, but really focusing on the benefit to the customer and how and why our solution is going to be the best and how it's going to get them to the place that they want to be. So we can enforce that consistency by automating the identification of watchwords and internal style guides. And really, we just want to make sure that we're consistent and we don't have any misalignments from a language perspective.
Great. So let's talk about, there's actually a few ways that we can attack this problem. I'm going to start with VT Writer, the other side of the VisibleThread suite that Allison summarized at the beginning. And if we have time, I can talk about kind of another way we can address this here at the end. But ultimately, what I've done here is I've taken an executive summary from a proposal. But this could be, you could have any kind of input from all of your authors. You could have technical volumes, past performance volumes. You can do it by author, you can do it by volume. But what I've done is let's take a look at the executive summary and let's review it for quality, for readability. And so VisibleThread will measure that content and it will say what percentage of sentences in the document are long. The human brain can only absorb so many words per sentence before you lose them. Are we using passive voice? Are we being clear in terms of who is doing what action? And then we measure readability and grade level. It's a measure of complexity. How many years of education do I need to really absorb your content? And we can use these objective metrics to drive better quality writing, and we can tee up editors and or authors to improve that based on the suggestions and issues that VisibleThread identifies. So you'll see kind of multicolor highlights here. Those are calling out certain issues that writers or editors would want to address. Where do we see long sentences? Where do we see passive voice? The yellow highlights are watchwords. This is a way you can enforce more consistency and avoid faux pas. I talk to users all the time. They want to avoid words like try. We don't want to try. We want to avoid words like best in class, best in breed, kind of those branding cliches. If they appear in the document, VisibleThread will highlight them and tell the editor or writer, don't use that, use this instead. So we're teeing up this editing cycle. We're not simply sending kind of redlined portions of content back to writers. It can be objective, it can be data-driven, and you can work this throughout the writing process. One other thing to think about, I think it's a really good story. I work with a pricing manager who runs every single basis of estimate through VT Writer. He knows how he arrived at the price. Will an evaluator? Would an auditor who doesn't necessarily live, breathe, and die by aircraft modification or landing gears? There's a lot of ways we can deploy this and make sure that you're putting your best foot forward and you're speaking appropriately to your audience. So, like I said, if we have time, we can talk about looking for consistency between customer terminology and your own proposal content, but wanted to show writer. And let's finish up with mistake number 5, compliance. It's a broad topic. It's an important topic. So what do I see here? Where's the challenge? Well, one, we need to identify these compliance requirements, issues, landmines. We want to identify them early and often. So the minute an RFP comes out, we want to be able to highlight these compliance issues. But more importantly, similar to the question that was asked earlier, well, what happens when we flag those items? Because compliance is more than just, well, are you using 12-point Times New Roman font? Are you submitting it in a zipped file? You know, there are some layered, important, complicated compliance requirements that need to be addressed and require review and assessment. You know, reporting requirements. What are we reporting? On what kind of cadence? What kind of data do we need? Intellectual property, really important for those in the design space. You know, how is an effort being funded? What IP are you bringing to the table? What's being developed? Sourcing requirements. Where are you obtaining your materials and services? This is taking on increased importance right now with current events. So we want to flag these items. We want to get this into a format that's reviewable and actionable for our subject matter experts. And then we always want to remember and consider subcontract flow-down implications. Whatever we owe our customer, we need to make sure that our vendors and suppliers are required or obligated to provide what we need them to provide to meet our upstream obligations. So there's a lot here. What can we do to address the challenge? Let's identify disqualifiers, landmines, requirements kind of upfront, early, and consistently. As RFPs change, there's amendments, maybe things come out of Q&A periods, what have you. We need to be able to quickly highlight changes and once again, flow them to the appropriate parties. And then can we flag and identify these requirements that require subcontractor flow down as well, or some kind of action? So once again, there's a few ways we can attack this within VisibleThread. I want to start at kind of the tip of the spear here. We'll return to concept tracking where we started. So in this case, this is a range of opportunities that we could be pursuing. And we'll see it's a different dictionary than what I was employing earlier. We're looking for different keywords, key compliance items we need to understand where and how they appear in a range of documents. Cost accounting standards, very important. Financial impact. Where do we need to have approved accounting systems in place? Maybe that's a disqualifier. Or it's at least a, hey, finance, FYI. We can see where those requirements appear. Security type requirements, top secret, facility clearances. Where do we see these terms being used? We can get into size standards, set-asides, small business subcontracting plans. It's a way to identify these risks early, in which documents do they appear, and that allows us to do a nice risk profile if we're thinking about which opportunities to pursue. Once again, there's resource concerns to think about. And we can get into deeper examples, or we can flag these in the content itself and add in action-oriented language. Well, so what? What happens if we come across cost accounting? We can also get into quality standards as well. Certifications, AS 9100, ISO 2001, cybersecurity certifications. Where are we being asked to prove this? Where do we need to have certain systems in place? And then who needs to review them? These are themes that we need to identify early, and we don't want to be 2 weeks into a proposal cycle before we flag it to relevant parties. So, concept tracking. Let's see. That was our last mistake. Really appreciate the question thus far. Keep them coming. We purposely left some time here at the end. Would love to get some good questions coming in, get a bit of a conversation going. That's in your interest too. I can talk your ear off if you want me to, but kind of filter those questions through, and we can go into more detail on what we've seen or other things that maybe the audience is thinking about as kind of top of mind.
Kyle, I have a question.
Sure.
So referencing back to identifying customer language and mirroring customer language, is there a way that VisibleThread can make it easier for us to identify, or for this customer to identify patterns in customer language?
Yes, good question. So those who know me might know this example, but I think it's a good one. I'm going to go back to our discovery function. So discovery is powerful because it's reading the words that are in the document and automatically identifying language, nouns, themes for you. So we're avoiding our own bias. So in this case, let's look at this RFP. It could be an RFI. It could be an RFP. It could be a statement of work, what have you. I'm going to remove a few documents here from consideration. These are all responses to the RFI. But when I'm just looking at the RFP, we still want to read the RFP, of course. But this is a great way to wrap your head around certain ideas and how the customer is speaking to them. So a little bit of context. This RFI is all about police-worn body cameras. The Pennsylvania Association of Police Chiefs issued it to industry. And we can see, evidence in a policing context is really important. But we can see the granular level of detail here. Evidence is obviously important, but derivative evidence is interesting. It appears 12 times, and this RFI isn't that long. That's interesting. I might not have thought to include derivative evidence if I didn't know the customer was referring to it, and I didn't kind of quite have it right here in front of me compared to other instances of it, than if I was at, page 39 of 40 at 7 p.m. on a Thursday night. This is a key way to do it. How are we referring to storage of data? Cloud storage, electronic storage, etc. We can see how the customer is using it. As we select those themes, once again, we're seeing it used in context. And so then, as we think about looking for alignment against your own writing, we can bring documents back in terms of this is one response to the RFI. Axon didn't mention cloud storage. They didn't mention electronic storage. That might be an issue. That's an interesting gap. Same idea with derivative evidence. Now, they hammered home evidence. That's good. They didn't speak to derivative evidence. We can look for that misalignment. So we can use discovery to actually very quickly create dictionaries using customer language. And then we can actually create a concept tracking dictionary like what we saw earlier. So why don't we do that quickly? Let's move into concept tracking. And this is a dictionary I created earlier. But against, this is the RFI. These are all the responses. We can see who is doing a good job of reiterating customer language. So all these terms were pulled right out of the RFI. And we can see, once again, everyone mentioned evidence in some capacity, some barely at all. None of them talked about derivative evidence. That's interesting. Governmental access to data as opposed to just broad access. Imagine if you could do this analysis before the proposal goes out the door. I actually speak with a lot of users who do just this. They use Discovery, they create a dictionary of key customer language, and they run up the RFP against their proposal as a whole or various volumes, and they look for gaps. And then they tee up their writers and their editors. Hey guys, there's a gap here. Let's plug it, and if not, tell me why. The boiler example. Customers mentioning boiler, we're not. Let's drop in a reference to it. So let me pause there. I'm terribly passionate about how discovery and concept tracking can work together. But that should definitely, I think, get the juices flowing as well. It looks like,
For sure.
Allison,
I
you
was
might
going
have
to say,
another question.
now we'd have another question.
Excellent.
So question is, how do you convert high hit terminology, so key terms, from a customer PWS to a keyword dictionary to compare against past performance?
Sure. I love it when it lines up like this. So we'll go back to what I was just doing. So I've selected evidence, I've selected derivative evidence. Yeah, in storage in this case. Let's actually grab one more just for good measure. You know, camera is probably important in a body-worn camera opportunity. Customer mentions it multiple times. So these are my selected themes. Based on frequency, the customer's using them. What you can do is you'll save that as a view. Or let's call it I'm just naming the view so it's memorable. And views are important because, one, you can return to that search in the future. So for example, we're working off of an RFI. Let's just say, for the sake of an argument, an RFP is then issued. Amendments to said RFP are issued. You can keep dropping those subsequent documents into this folder, and you can deploy the same exact search against the new document. So from a convenience factor, you're not having to re-click all those themes, and you're being consistent in what you're searching for. And you can see interesting changes or a lack of change in how those themes are being used. So that's one reason why views are important. The more important reason to answer the question is you can create dictionaries from these views. So these keywords that I selected, these are important to the customer, they're important to me. I'm going to click that button right there. I can create a concept dictionary or a quality dictionary. Let's actually go to the dictionary quickly. Those are those themes that I selected. And now, let's just say, for the sake of argument, all these documents in here are now maybe past statements of work. I'm looking for past performance evidence now, for the sake of argument. I'm just going to use a different dictionary. And I have a lot of dictionaries. So I'm applying now the dictionary that I just created. And now, where in my past statements of work, my past contracts, have I spoken to camera systems, to evidence? And I can once again look for that density of hit. And if you really wanted to get crazy, you could then select one of these documents and use this dictionary to then pull out those keywords right within the text that it appears. Would be kind of the natural progression. And that question's important because this person's thinking about kind of a progression of functionality. We're moving from customer document to customer terminology into our own past content. So I think that continuity of language is really important and a really thoughtful way to be thinking about it. And you can see how discovery can allow you to kind of pull that out quickly, create those dictionaries, and deploy it then downstream against past performance examples, and then once again against your own proposals. We can work VisibleThread into the entire proposal lifecycle, from customer document analysis to our own proposal responses, and even then into contract award. So, good question.
Okay. So Kyle, last kind of question here that I want to jump into before we walk into a more example. So we talked about responding to requirements, and the question here is, how are customers driving action on responding to requirements? So the system is helping you to identify the requirements and identify the areas. So how are customers beginning to drive action on that and make that something easier to be accessible?
Yeah, really good question. And we're going back to dictionaries. And so to any existing VisibleThread users on the line, this is a great opportunity to engage with your customer success manager. So dictionaries are more than just flagging keywords. They can be used in this example to drive action. So I'm going to quickly show you the dictionary and then we'll use it in an example. In this case, I like compliance-oriented examples because everyone knows, security, keywords. Export is kind of this alien language. We know it's important, but what do we do when we come across these keywords? So whenever I see top secret, classified, certain FARs, we can drop in guidance. What do we need to do when we see it? This information generally lives within organizations. You have policy documents, you have playbooks, or even just ask your security team. And you can start to memorialize that guidance into your dictionary. So whenever we see top secret, for example, we want to verify consistent markings in customer documentation. If the statement of work is stamped top secret, but the DD-254 does not state top secret, I don't want the black helicopters landing on my lawn. We can quickly call out that inconsistency and have the customer clarify. Same thing with export. What do we need to do when we come across these risky items? We can engage our trade compliance team. We can define what's going on here. So just wanted to show you this description column is important. So let's just use, here. I'll use an Army solicitation. So I go into my quality analysis tab and I'm going to grab that dictionary that I was just using. And there are those categories. I'm going to create this responsibility matrix. I'm going to stick with paragraph for now. And I'll just quickly show you, we're going to once again flag this keyword, but in the subsequent column, we'll call out for either you or your interested parties, your stakeholders, what needs to happen. So you're getting the entire solicitation, in this case verbatim, once again. Let's jump down to these dictionary hits. And we can see here, unclassified, security, cyber. Who's ultimately responsible for reviewing these? And we can then, so our security team is responsible for security, classifications, etc. That makes perfect sense. But here in the term description column, you see that action-oriented guidance. So it's all here in a line. Security needs to review it. This is what they need to do. And this is customized to your context. Actually, just for the group, so cool story recently, I actually have a user who's creating a dictionary of labor categories. And what they're looking for is past performance evidence of said labor category that they're pursuing now. And so they've actually used the labor category title, so systems engineer, as the keyword. And they've dropped into the term description what that labor category needs to do. And so they then use that dictionary against their past performance examples, statements of work, etc. And so they'll flag systems engineer. This would be the description of what they need to do for the current effort, and then the reader can verify, are these things the same? If yes, I can use this as an example. So there's another cool way you can use dictionaries from kind of a past performance example, still using that term description column to great effect. Hopefully that was okay. Anytime I say like labor categories, hopefully people's eyes don't glaze over. But it's really important that we tee up our reviewers. We can drive not only just good action, but consistent action. And that's really important if you have new people joining the team, less experienced reviewers. It's a way you can memorialize that review and ensure consistency.
Great. So do you want to jump in and just go through the BVTI example so we have a specific example of how customers are using this?
Sure, yeah. This is a great story. I think customer success is truly a storytelling function. So we'll finish with a good example. So BVTI is one of our small business customers, and their story encapsulates kind of a lot of the themes that we worked through today. So as a small shop, they have limited resources that they can deploy to go win business. So what can we do? Well, that compliance matrix allows us to slice and dice requirements. We're not going to miss anything. We can tee up those reviewers to get into the weeds, start thinking about the requirement, price it accordingly, identify risk and scope. Now, we never have enough time, right? Maybe you have 30 days to respond, 30 to 60 days. And even then, high complexity proposals, you never have enough time. People have competing priorities. And so, the dot compare came in handy. If my memory serves me, the customer sent a revised RFP out on like December 24th or something crazy like that. And they, of course, wanted a response and a revised proposal, January 2nd or something like that. So, they can come back refreshed from the holiday, but now BVTI is scrambling to work over the holiday to respond. Well, Doc Compare can quickly identify what's changed from a requirements perspective, from a compliance perspective, identify the change. Is it material? We can respond. Quickly update their response based on those changes. We don't want to rewrite the whole thing. Run it through VT readability, ensure the written content is tight, it's coherent, it's readable. The readability analysis is quick. It allows those editors and writers more time to work their way through those suggestions that we call out. And then once again, we have to do this throughout the cycle, tracking those revisions. Can we maintain our sanity and rev control as we go? They were able to submit the proposal on time. They avoided having to work over the entire break. They are able to win the $20 million effort. They estimated that they saved over 18 hours in that final week when they had to scramble. And their QA check, they were right on the money from an accuracy perspective. So it's just a great example of whether you're a large-scale organization, you're a small business. We really want to empower teams to go win strategic business, to communicate strategically, and free up your time to do value-add work. Think about requirements. Think about risk. We don't want people pulling their hair out, copying and pasting. Here is a 100-page statement of work. Tell me what it's going to cost. And oh, by the way, you have 4 days to do it. If we can limit that to the greatest extent possible, the business is in better shape. There's less burnout on the team, and we should see higher quality. So terribly passionate about the topic. Any other questions that came in? Or I can always finish with a nice call to action. Allison, what do you think?
Call to action would be great.
Excellent. Okay, so thank you to the group for your time and attention. I know you're busy, particularly this time of year. Really appreciate you joining us. Hope you found this helpful. To my current existing users, if there's anything that you'd like to talk more about, there's anything that you thought, wow, that's cool, reach out to your customer success manager. Please, we are here to have these discussions, to tailor functionality to your process. To those who have not yet joined the wonderful world of VisibleThread, please do reach out with questions, and you may be lucky enough to talk with Allison about where we might be able to help. So really appreciate your time and attention again. Thank you. We will share the slides and the recording with all registrants, so don't worry. If you missed something or if you want to share it with others, that will be sent out momentarily, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Great.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much
Allison.
for joining us, and we appreciate your questions.